So, this is the first of two expert panel discussions. The second one is housing, which we'll have in half an hour or 25 minutes or so. The first one is on energy, one of our major themes for today, obviously, but also industry. They go together, of course. So I'm going to hand it over to Jo Williams, who has agreed to chair for us, and she can take it from here. There will be Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so, so do think about the questions you might want to put to the panel in the light of the discussion in the first 15 minutes. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you. Begin by introducing the panel. So we have Kathryn Porter, who many of you might have heard from over the course of this past week. So I was just saying, Kathryn seems to have popped up on every podcast that I listen to, so I've fallen to sleep most evenings this week, which is no reflection on either Kathryn's wonderful words or the podcasts that she has appeared on. But Kathryn is an independent energy consultant, an associate member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Energy, the Executive Council of that group. I'm also joined by Angus Hanton, entrepreneur, investor, researcher, co-founder of the Intergenerational Foundation, and Matthew Kirtley, who we heard from earlier today, public relations consultant specialising in technology and engineering, and also a contributor to The Critic. So I have to confess at the outset that I'm the only person on this panel who professes absolutely no expertise whatsoever in energy. So you're all going to have to bear with me with my...
fell asleep on the podcast.
This is true. You're going to have to bear with me, I'm afraid, with my very, very basic questions. And what we'll try to do is to get out to the floor and take your questions, which I'm sure will be far more interesting and insightful, as quickly as possible. So when I said I was going to start with basic questions, I wasn't lying. The most basic question I would like an answer to is, why are my fuel bills so damn expensive? If you could explain that to me, please, as simply and straightforwardly as possible, I would be very grateful. Would you like to kick us off?
No, Matthew should probably start. Thank you.
Oh, well, as one of the big areas that we focus on in our recent green paper, and this is an area actually that Kathryn has been has consistently spoken out to, is that the rise in our energy bills is not due to gas becoming more expensive. There have been brief supply shocks, like in 2022 in the Russo-Ukrainian war, but for the most part, the post-2004 trend in energy price rises is due to the rising amount of non-wholesale costs. These are principally in the form of things like policy costs or network costs. And a major contention in our new green paper is that these have arisen as a post hoc means to ration energy, because ultimately the intermittent nature of renewable sources means that it's much harder to supply them reliably. So you have to ration energy down at peak moments. I don't know, like Kathryn, if that analysis sounds prima facie to you.
Yeah, so what we hear from people like Ed Miliband is that the reason we have higher energy costs is because of gas and the international gas price. We have the highest industrial electricity prices in the developed world and the fourth highest domestic electricity prices in the developed world. But it should be pretty obvious that if the cause is international gas prices, then every other country that's importing gas should be exposed to the same costs. So why are we the highest and not other people? So there's a logical flaw in that argument. If you look at wholesale gas and electricity prices going back to the late 90s and compare it with what households spend on electricity, you see that up until 2006, wholesale gas prices were pretty low and stable. In fact, up until 2021, late 2021, wholesale gas prices were pretty low and stable. Wholesale electricity prices were pretty low and stable, just a bit higher than the wholesale gas cost, which is what you'd expect. And then up until 2006, the retail price, which households pay, was just low and stable and a little bit more than the wholesale price. And you'd expect this, because to deliver electricity to your home, you've got to buy it in the wholesale markets, then you've got to deliver it, you've got to have billing, you've got to have some call centres, and that costs some money. So you have a bit of cost added on top. From 2006 onwards, the effect of regulation that really began a few years before that started to bite. Now, 2000 saw the Utilities Act, which created suppliers. It was the final part of the privatisation piece, the final aspects of unbundling. And that was supposed to herald a deregulated market. But having deregulated in terms of ownership structure, we immediately started to re-regulate, but this time around net zero. And we began adding on subsidies in a significant way. We started subsidising in 1990, but from 2006 this really started to ramp up. We started adding things like the energy company obligation, where suppliers are expected to help insulate people's homes. The suppliers have no benefit of doing that. They don't have any knowledge, so this is an extra cost because it's inefficient. The warm homes discount, that's a form of wealth transfer where one group of customers subsidises a discount for another group of customers. The smart meter rollout, all of these extra costs started to be added to bills. And with renewables, you didn't just have the cost of the subsidy, you had the cost of backup because it's not always windy and sunny, and you have a lot of extra infrastructure costs because wind and sun are very low energy density, so you have to build a lot more turbines and solar panels, and that requires more wires and more substations, and all of that just gets added onto bills. And so while you've seen the wholesale cost of gas fall significantly and the wholesale electricity price fall significantly, you've seen a much smaller fall in bills because those other costs that are not to do with the wholesale price have just kept going up and up and up.
Yeah, but I think, Kathryn, there's something, if I may say so, something much more fundamental. It's because our policymakers don't care. Yeah. They don't care about low energy prices in the way that, say, they do in the States. So in the US, the typical industry price for energy is between 8 and 9 cents, and for consumers it's about 16 to 17 cents. So about half what we pay here, a bit less than half. And that's because their politicians care. It's the same goes in the next panel. You'll be talking about housing. In this country, the politicians care about keeping house prices up, whereas what young people want is lower house prices. And it's the same sort of problem with energy. So all this detail is important and absolutely critical to how it works, but fundamentally we want politicians who want lower prices, whether they get them from turbines, panels, coal, gas. And incidentally, there's a big issue as well here that so much of our energy economy depends on the US. So LNG comes from almost all from the US, and almost all the control systems in the energy industry are from the US. Many of the turbines are from GEC. So one of the big arguments that William and I have sort of bonded over is to show the extent to which the UK economy has become dependent on the US, and the extent to which the British politicians in power, who don't seem to care, are allowing foreigners, particularly Americans, to buy up British companies. So I think the answer is it's a matter of priorities.
So I mean, I don't disagree with that, but what we're hearing from politicians and from people like Ed Miliband is that wind is cheap, and that's fundamentally not true. And I think this causes a lot of confusion for people, that they're being misled. And if it's not a sacrilege to say that in this group, I think in March when Kemi Badenoch gave that speech on energy policy and she said that we'd taken prosperity for granted, that really resonated for me because we assumed that we had prosperity and then we started strangling ourselves with red tape. And the consequence of that was that the prosperity's gone away.
So, if we were to have a government that scrapped net zero, we have a general election, new government, the end of net zero, would our fuel prices come down straight away without doing anything else? Would that alone bring our fuel prices down?
Sadly
and
not.
if not, why not?
Well, so we have a lot of subsidised renewables where those are fundamentally driven by contracts between the government and developers. So to tear up those contracts. Now I know that Richard Tice has come out and said that Reform wouldn't honour new contracts to be signed. Now I think that's fair enough because those deals don't exist yet. So he's put those companies on notice. If Reform wins, they might tear those up, and they've got to take that risk if they decide to sign them. But for contracts that have already been signed, to repudiate those would be damaging. Now, I think there's some renegotiation that can be done. You can save some money, for example, changing from RPI to CPI indexation. that's costing us a few £billion a year. But in and of itself, just stopping and drawing a line today wouldn't save us money. Now, it will avoid us spending more money, but the other big problem that we have is our electricity infrastructure is getting old, our conventional infrastructure. A third of our gas power stations were built in the 1990s. These things typically only last up to 30 years. So unless we start to really upgrade or replace them, but right now if you order a new turbine, it's 7 to 8 years to get it. It's 5 years for a new rotor, it's a year and a half for major components for maintenance. We've got 4 of our remaining 5 nuclear reactors will be closed by 2030, and with Sizewell B scheduled for a major outage at around that time, and Hinkley won't have opened, we'll have 0 nuclear on the grid at the beginning of the next Parliament, unless something changes. So meeting demand will become extremely difficult. And so in that context, prices will go up. So we really need, waiting for the next general election would be catastrophic.
So if scrapping net zero won't bring our prices down automatically, what does need to happen in order to bring our fuel prices down?
Well, as we conveniently outlined in our new energy green paper, Energy Abundance. Sorry, I got to show this. But we believe ultimately that in the short run, a process of what we call grid stabilization must be carried out, the rapid construction of new fossil fuel plant. Now, Kathryn is absolutely right. We are locked in the foreseeable future in the contracts for difference, the allocation rounds that we're currently signed up for. But once we do stabilize the grid with the 60 gigawatts of new fossil fuel capacity we outlined in our green paper, and then begin getting underway on the 40 gigawatts of nuclear, a lot of options open up to us. And over the course of this, a lot of existing renewable capacity will age out and we won't renew it, etc. But for more egregious rounds, like the recent AR7 round, for example, which saw prices well above the level of reasonability, I do think there is a reasonable case to make when it comes to that point when we have stabilised our grid and we don't need these renewable sources anymore, to declare these to be odious liabilities. These are not liabilities that I believe we should honour. They were made in bad faith, and they were made ultimately through regulatory capture between these renewable generators and the state. And ultimately, I believe one key thing that we do need to do in the energy system is to reset the relationship between the state and the market. The state should set the rules of the game, not the market. The state should ultimately dictate the nature and the future and the vision of the energy system, not the short-term profit motive of the market. And just as we should politically punish those leaders like Miliband who've gutted our energy system out, so too I believe we must punish the profiteers who've set up this perverse incentive structure which has allowed the British people to be taken for a ride. That's a long job.
I'd like to change the subject just a little bit to give a bit of light entertainment for those who are members of the SDP, which I suspect is most of you. So when the SDP was founded in, I think, March 1981, it had been, so it's a bit of a distraction, but I thought it might be fun. One of the people who launched, one of the gang of 4 who launched it was David Owen, and before he launched it, he was in my rooms at college in Oxford, and so I had a long conversation with him then. And then he launched the SDP, or gave his thoughts on it, and it was properly launched 2 months later with the other 3. And I know that it kind of ran into the ground and had to be reformed in 1990. And William, I think, was a member from 1982. And so I just thought it was a strange anecdote for me that I have this link with David Owen and the SDP. And then I worked as a volunteer in the early 80s in the Cowley Street offices, and for my book, David Owen was really helpful and constructive. But that doesn't actually help you on the question of energy. I think one of the things that the SDP represents is a pragmatism in relation to this question, between state control and the private sector. And I think some privatisations work and some don't. And I think there's a general view that energy has been at best problematic. So I think sort of stepping back, I think there's definitely a much more of a role for the state to drive down energy prices and take more control of the energy sector.
I would argue the opposite, that if in 2000, after passing the Utilities Act, the state had stopped interfering with the energy market, we would have had a very different outcome.
But what about if it interfered in a different way?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? It's interference. And so if you're going to have a system where you have politicians who don't know anything about energy interfering in the energy market, then it's not surprising you get bad outcomes.
But isn't the free market at the moment driving up prices rather than driving them down?
No, it's not.
I would take a step back and I would say, I don't think it's possible for a strategically vital industry like energy to be immune from political pressures. I think any system in which you believe that the market will operate just without political pressure or political influence, given its central strategic importance in the economy, it has a degree of utopianism, in my view. Ultimately, politicians of course are going to try and muddle at the incentives of the energy system because it's the central economic input, just as they muddle with the minimum wage, just as they muddle with corporation tax. It's a factor of production alongside labour and capital. You're going to inevitably have some degree of political interference, and I don't think saying the state should just pull back, well, that's just not how the incentive structure in a democratic state works.
In the US,
excuse me, everybody, sorry.
Yeah.
We will take that one out to the floor, and let's hope to hear a range. It'd be really good to get a range of views. What do people think? Do we need more state regulation, or do we need the state to get out of the energy, stop interfering in the energy markets? I actually had one more question, but I'd be interested to hear what people from the floor think of this as well before you come back and give us your answers. Is again a very basic, a very self-interested question. Will my lights stay on this winter? But let's see, show of hands please, anybody who'd like to speak. Maybe if it's okay with you, I'll take a few and then you can pick and choose which ones you want to answer. So I can see a man right at the back there, just, yeah. If you could stand up please.
Yes, I wondered what the panel thought of INEOS taking their £3 billion power to America, not here, and also the party, whenever they produce a green paper, it'd be a good idea to have a small thing like the new declaration, because the public, with the best will in the world, they've got 30 seconds to decide who they're going to vote for. And so brevity, like the leader's speech, is very good.
And there's a woman just as well, just at the back as well, you can see, yeah.
Hi, I'm Claire from Bristol. I don't really know much about all of this, but anyway, from what I understand, Norway, who have made huge amounts of money from discovering oil, and I think a lot of that is nationalised, and that Norway makes a huge amount of money for its people. Is that something that we would consider? Do you think that's a good idea? If that area of energy is nationalised, or we have some sort of say in that? And the other thing I was going to ask was this idea of rationing, that energy is rationed, which I don't really quite understand that, because if something's rationed, then that means that we are only allowed to use a certain amount, and I'm not aware of anybody or any part of our system or economy that is being rationed and is being denied energy. So I don't know if you could explain that. I mean, I don't have to switch my lights off or anything, so I don't know who's being rationed.
Yeah, good question, thank you. Should we take one more, just at the back over there as well, thank you.
Hello, I'm not a member. So what happened to climate change and the climate crisis? Is that not a thing anymore?
Okay, they're great questions, thank you. Should we start with you, Kathryn?
Okay, so I'll try and keep the first comment in mind and be brief. The second comment on Norway, so all of the energy system in Norway is under state ownership. They make all the money on the upstream oil and gas production. They use very little of it within Norway itself, and they chose to put all the income from that into a sovereign wealth fund that then is used for other things within the state. Now, we chose not to do that. The main difference, so we were taking tax receipts instead, and this was extremely valuable to us, and also it contributed to us having a massive balance of payments benefit where we exported more than we imported just across the economy as a whole. Now, as the basin has gone into decline and not been renewed, and as the taxes have got higher and disincentivized new exploration and appraisal activity, we're making far, far less money than Norway. And people say, well, the basin's in decline. Norway just made a major find that's about 2 to 3% of our reserves right next to the UK continental shelf. So there absolutely is plenty more oil and gas to be got out of the North Sea. It's we're choosing not to do it. And on the final point about climate, I would say that the UK is responsible for 0.8% of global carbon dioxide emissions. We could eliminate that altogether. It would make absolutely no difference to the climate. It would make no difference to climate change. Our current policy is to measure territorial production emissions. So all that happens is our manufacturing closes, it moves to places with dirtier energy, global emissions go up, we get poorer, we are, lose jobs, lose industry, more people in fuel poverty, and Ed Miliband sits there smugly saying that he's,
So, I think Kathryn was actually very apt in covering a lot of those questions. There's one regarding the question of rationing. So, all prices are in essence a type of rationing mechanism because prices serve to reduce demand for a good in some way. If everything were free, demand would have demand could be theoretically unlimited. Unless, in the case of Jaffa cakes, you get full of something like that. So the price mechanism is usually set as classic economics 101 through where the supply curve meets the demand curve, generally where things clear. The system of rationing that I'm referring to is a deliberate policy of increasing the costs borne on the demand side by throwing extra costs in to reduce the quantity of demand available. So it's a policy of rationing, price rationing, not through ration cards or ration restrictions, but to use the price mechanism as a blunt force tool to suppress the quantity of energy demand. This is absolutely necessary because the amount of electricity supplied by our grid has fallen in joule terms by 25% odd since 2005, primarily because we've replaced pretty reliable coal capacity with intermittent renewable capacity, which, in the case of wind turbines, only turn 33% of the year, and in the case of solar panels, only catch sunlight 10% of the year. Hopefully that managed to capture the rationing question, or am I still being a bit too Byzantine?
No, that's good, thank you. Angus?
Can I comment on the Norway question? So Norway took a very different approach from Britain. They have a smaller population which helps them in this respect, but essentially Britain squandered its North Sea oil and the receipts from it, and it decided instead to build up debts for the next generation, not just the national debt, but the hidden debts of the state pension and the public sector pensions. Norway, by contrast, decided to manage its finances conservatively and they've got a sovereign wealth fund which is equivalent per household to over $500,000, which means they don't need to charge for university fees, and they've got a reserve, a meaningful reserve as a country, and they own across Europe. They typically own between 1% and 2% of most companies. So that's a sensible policy, and I think this party ought to be advocating much more sound finances which give much more respect to younger and future and unborn generations, and less allowing baby boomers today to consume at their expense.
We can take just one more question, please. Oh, so many hands, and I'm so sorry. I saw one man right at the very back there. Yeah, thank you. If we can get a mic there. Thank you.
Yeah, would scrapping the 20 billion carbon capture machine help to plug the 22 billion black hole?
Well, that was an admirably succinct question for us to end on. If we could have a yes/no response to that question, if possible, and also a yes/no response to my question about will my lights stay on this winter? Brevity, really important.
Yes, your lights will stay on. And no, that wouldn't be enough to plug the black hole. I don't believe it's a 20 billion black hole. I believe it's more like a 2 trillion black hole.
Wow, thank you.
Similarly, yes, the carbon capture scheme is a massive money pit, but you know the governmental money pit as a whole is much faster. In terms of whether the light's going to stay on this year, I'm getting worried. I do think we've made a lot of stupid decisions.
Why?
Ultimately, I think that there's the matter of inertia. The grid doesn't really. If the grid runs into a problem where there's an interruption in power supply, it's actually it's much harder for it to recover in good order. We saw this recently in Spain. You saw that massive national blackouts. It's largely like I'm always terrible at explaining this particular point. It's a good chance Kathryn's could explain it better than I. But in effect, traditional fossil fuel plants have the ability to stabilize the grid because they've got a lot of inertial momentum in their turbines, whereas it's not so much the case for intermittent renewables, which means we're very exposed if there's a sudden drop in wind or in wind speed or an increase in cloud cover.
Okay.
Thank you. Kathryn?
Okay, so carbon capture also no, but for a different reason. Most of that money was going to be added onto bills rather than through taxation, so it's just different pots, if you like. So I'm increasingly worried about security of supply. We had a near miss this year. There are two ways in which this risk manifests. One is we literally run out of generation. We don't have enough generation to meet demand. And if the system operator, NESO, doesn't see it coming, and in January it didn't see it coming, its forecasting is absolutely terrible. In fact, after that event in January, they implemented an audit of their demand forecasting, admitting they hadn't looked at it in, quote, 10 to 20 years. So, and you can just imagine all the market change that's happened in the past 2 decades. And then the other risk is the one that was just mentioned around what happened in Spain, the stability risk. As we add more intermittent generation, and it's not actually the clouds and a drop in wind that we're really vulnerable to, it's if an interconnector trips out, so one of the cables that imports electricity from other countries, or if a large power station trips out, that causes a drop in what we call grid frequency. Conventional power stations, because they're made of big heavy lumps of metal, they resist changes to their mode of operation. Wind and solar don't. The way they're coupled to the grid is fundamentally different. And renewables were the cause of the blackout in Spain. This is now absolutely established. It was a faulty inverter at a solar farm that created the original grid disturbance. There was widespread non-compliance with grid codes, and particularly the non-compliance on fault ride through that caused the frequency to fall, which made the conventional generation self-disconnect because this stuff will damage equipment if they keep connected, and that caused the cascading blackout. So it's absolutely 100% down to renewables. And so if you put too many renewables on the grid and you don't manage the stability properly, then you risk blackouts.
Thank you very much. Stock up on candles and batteries, everyone, would be my advice. Can we thank the panel, please? Thank you.